Good morning, class. Welcome to our introduction to building laws and regulations. Now, today I'm just simply going to do an introduction to today's unit where you would be required to do some reading and research regarding some of the building laws and regulations highlighted, and you will have several activities to complete over the this week and next week. Okay, so with that being said, let's proceed with today's introduction to this new topic. So the unit objectives for this unit, it's pretty simple and straightforward. So upon completion of this unit, students will be able to understand the public health context of building laws and regulations. So there would be some selected laws and regulations that we would look at. Of course, that is by no means the extent of the laws and regulations that would be applicable to you in public health with regards to building structures. However, we have selected some of them to focus on for this unit. And what you really would be looking at is you would have to be able to go through those laws and identify what is relevant in the particular context of building health and building performance. Okay, I will give you some guidance, but you would be required to do some work where that is concerned. So the laws that we would be focusing on for this unit would be the Water and Sewerage Act, the Regional Health Authorities Act, Town and Country Planning Act, Streets and Building Ordinance, and the Environmental Management Act. I think in your resources I've included a couple more as well. So this schematic essentially attempts to summarize what you all should be focusing on during this unit. So let's start at the top, right? So this is essentially a concept map of the unit, and we see our main focus here is building health and performance, right? And we have our other issues that we'll be addressing, which here we've highlighted the various pieces of legislation, and I have some details which you would find in your summary notes for this lesson. You would find some further details. So for the Water and Sewerage Act, we are going to be focusing on the purpose of the act. Would also be looking at what are the responsibilities of the Water and Sewerage Authority, that is WASA. So that authority would have been created as a result of the provisions of the Act. Some of the responsibilities you'll be looking at would be some of the details of their responsibility in terms of water supply, drainage, and wastewater. All right, what are WASA's responsibility with regards to those particular issues and services and provision as it pertains to either a public building or a private building? Because remember, we talked about the boundaries of buildings in the previous one of the previous lessons, and we understood that the boundaries of the building extends way beyond that of the external walls. You also have to look at some of those other services, particularly those utility services that are necessary for the proper functioning of the building, and those authorities that are participate in providing those services. WASA is also responsible for sanitation. So what are their responsibilities in terms of your localized sewage works? So remember, building will have sewage requirements, and those sewage requirements would also be connected to and extended to the larger sewage networks. In the context of the Environmental Management Act. So for each of these acts or pieces of legislation, you need to know what the overall purpose of the act is. So we also have purpose of the Environmental Management Act. You would want to look at what are the emergency response provisions in the Act as it pertains to public health. Um, so, for example, you have emergencies that can occur of all various natures. It could be, let's say, like it could be a fire, it could be a chemical spill, a gas leak. Any of these things can occur at one particular location, but it can have a public health impact in terms of health and safety, not only for the occupants of the building, but also for um, visitors to the building, or depending on what the scale of that emergency looks like, also the neighboring community. So here you'd see I've pointed you to section 5 of that legislation. So anywhere you see that I've done that, whether it's here in this diagram or in the summary notes, you would be expected to go to the piece of legislation and look at that section to have further detail and understanding of what it provides. The Act, Environmental Management Act, also looks at air air, noise, and water pollution. It addresses standards with regards, because pollution is something that we cannot avoid, right? But what the Act provides is it identifies guidelines or standards beyond which it is considered harmful to human health and the environment. So what are those standards, and then what are the provisions for permits to allow a certain amount of pollution, and what happens if that is violated by any of the applicants. Um, Environmental Management Act also looks at waste management, in particular, um, in terms of hazardous waste. How would hazardous waste be handled? How should it be handled? Also, with regards to the Basel Convention, which provides details as to how that is an international convention. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the Basel Convention, that's something you might want to look up so you can have some idea of what that convention is about. So, that has a lot to do with international guidelines for the production, handling, and transportation of waste, hazardous waste in particular, especially um, across borders and boundaries. Okay, the Environmental Management Act also addresses the handling of spills, releases, and other incidents also related to hazardous waste. Then we have the Regional Health Authorities Act. Again, the purpose. You'll also want to focus on the management of disposal of surplus and unserviceable items. So this is in particular context of the health authorities, health centers, hospitals, etc. So we're looking at issues like medical waste. Um, Again, I'm not expecting you all to have a detailed understanding, but at this point, you really want to you just want to be aware of what pieces of legislations are relevant and have some idea of the basic provisions of the Act. Because as public health officers, for those of you who, I don't know how many of you may have already done the, I think it's administration and legislation course. I know you would have been introduced to a lot of legislation, particularly as it pertains to the public health ordinance. So if you have already been exposed to that, you may also have additional legislation information that you can add, um, contribute to the content and the community learning within this course. Okay, right. So disposal of items, surplus and unserviceable items, I guess, such as bio waste, etc. It also looks at the delivery of healthcare goods and services, and in particular, from a building perspective, um, the occupational safety and health. All right, so you want to see how that relates to the health and the performance of the building, and also the Regional Health Authorities Act also provides for the promotion and surveillance, health promotion and surveillance. So I want you all to be thinking in the context of how are these issues relevant to the health and safety of the occupants of the building? Because remember, at the end of the day, that that building, you are creating an environment that will affect the occupants of the building, those who may be either long-term occupants and those who may be temporary occupants, such as visitors or clients who come in and out of a building. And then you also have external parties, such as in your community, who may also be affected. All right, so this is how I want you all to be thinking. Then we also have the Town and Country Planning Act. Again, know the purpose of the act. Some of the areas of focus of the act would be the control and development of land. So, for example, every time you have to develop a building, whether it's a new building or if you need to add to your building, make alterations, you have to get permission from Town and Country Planning Division. So the Town and Country Planning Division is the agency responsible for carrying out the provisions of this act. In a subsequent unit, we'll be looking at agencies. So we will encounter some of these organizations again. Right, so continuing, you have to get permission from Town and Country Planning and Division, that is. And they would usually have very strict requirements before an application can be granted. Okay, so the Town and Country Planning Act also focuses on the provision of preservation of trees and woodlands. And one of the areas of concern from our perspective, our focus on public health might be tree cutting, for example. How do they manage issues of tree cutting, especially as it pertains to, let's say, like trees on private property that may be overhanging public roads or pavements, etc. What are the regulations they have in place? Also, trees that may be hanging over from one property onto another, that may be hazardous, especially if it's an old tree. That could be hazardous to the safety and the health of passers-by. Additionally, maintenance of wasteland. Do you have vacant sites available in the area? Is it affecting public safety in terms of maintenance of the site? The abandonment of sites that may lead to public health issues, such as creating an environment for the breeding of mosquitoes, increasing the risk of dengue or whatever the case may be, right? And then as the next one, streets and buildings ordinance. Now this is an old ordinance. I haven't found any further documentation with regards to the update of this ordinance, but certainly the principles are very important here. So you need to be able to have a description of the act. This act addresses layout and construction of new streets. So the details are provided in Schedule 2 of that act. All right. So when we look at, I believe it is the next unit on agencies. One of the documents we would be looking at would be under the Town and Country Planning Division Act, there's a document where there's a guide for developers. So some of these details in terms of layout of construction of streets and provision for setbacks and all of these things, we will have information available as well. Now, with regards to legislation and even the agencies that we would look at, you would find that there's actually quite a bit of overlap and intersection of the provisions of these acts. So sometimes, for example, if you have to get permission to develop land for the development of a new structure or alteration at town and country planning, you find you will have to get approvals from several different agencies, which would be governed by several different pieces of legislation before you can get final approval from town and country. So this is one of the important things I want you all to remember and to make note of, because this is actually a challenge for us here in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of managing our environment and development. Okay, continuing, the Streets and Buildings Ordinance, management of alterations or erections of new buildings. It provides for the identification of buildings as ruinous and a potential hazard to public health. So we know that some buildings, after time, they and lack of maintenance over time, it actually becomes the integrity of the building becomes so poor that it becomes a health hazard, a safety and health hazard for any of the occupants and even for those in the community. So that's something that you would want to look at as well. The authority, related to the Streets and Buildings Ordinances, that is, it provides authority to send notices to owners where fencing joining streets need repair. So if you have a property that is bound by a street on one side, if your fence needs repair, and it is in a state that could be a public health hazard, the notices can be sent to you, requesting that you fix your fence and repair your fence. And of course, usually for most of these pieces of legislation that makes provision for these notices and warnings, there are also penalties involved if you ignore the warnings beyond a certain number of warnings and a certain number of times. Okay, so this is in essence a summary of what you'll be looking at for this unit. Additionally, we are also going to be, over the course of the 2 weeks, we will be completing a couple activities. The one for this week will be another discussion forum, and this will be administered via the e-classroom. So the question that you'll be looking at is, you're required to discuss any 3 laws. So I'm giving you a choice, so you can for this lesson, I'm giving you a choice. You can focus on any 3 laws in Trinidad and Tobago which can positively impact public health as it relates to building construction. Your answer should identify the laws and the relevant sections, that is the sections relevant to the safety and the health of the building. And remember, the safety and the health of the building is always in relation to us human beings. And additionally, you are asked to explain using examples how these laws will guide responsible building construction. Okay, this activity will be unmarked, however, feedback will be provided. So note, you must complete this activity. So just because I'm saying it is unmarked doesn't mean that you do not complete the activity, because remember, feedback is important so that you will know if you are on the right track. Because the following week, we will be doing a review quiz, right? And that review quiz will cover all the laws. So for this first week here, week 3, you are not required to focus on all of the laws, but you probably at least want to have a quick overview so that you can decide which 3 you want to focus on. But by the following week, you would be expected to have covered all the laws, because you will have a review quiz that will be based on all of them. So you can use the same framework that I presented in the schematic there for you in order to go through those laws. And as I said, you are also provided with some summary notes as well. But the summary notes is just to guide your review, because you are expected to go straight to the pieces of legislation which I have made available on the e-classroom for you. So it's really just a starting point, but you all do have some of your own reading to do in terms of understanding the laws. So at this point, I just want to say thank you for joining me for today's lesson. I would now like to direct you to eClassroom for the details and information for this week's activity.